Welcome back to Roots Music History. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the life story of Merle Haggard. Merle Haggard's life story is even more insane than I thought it was. I feel like today's episode is inspired by the Jelly Roll episode I did last week. If you have not seen my Roots documentary on Jelly Roll, I went into Jelly Roll's entire history as an ex-felon. Jelly Roll is nothing compared to Merle Haggard. Merle was actually born the exact same day that he died. He was born on April 6th, 1937. Now, before we get into Merle's life specifically, we have to go back a few years and talk about what was happening in America during that decade. Because the events of that decade and of the Dust Bowl really set the stage for Merle's parents moving to California, and I feel like set the stage for Merle's life in general. Let's go back to April of 1935. That was just 2 years before Merle Haggard was born. April 14th, 1935 is commonly referred to today as Black Sunday. If you are not familiar with the Dust Bowl was a series of dust storms that spanned over a decade in the 1930s. It is why most people refer to the 1930s as, quote, the Dirty 30s. After the Civil War, farmers saw an enormous opportunity to grow crops in the Midwest. Not just the Midwest, but the Great Plains. It spanned all the way from Canada all the way down to Texas. Farmers from the East Coast were looking at the Great Plains and thinking, what are we doing trying to farm on the East Coast? It's rocky, there's a lot of trees, the terrain is terrible. They were looking at the Great Plains thinking there was so much opportunity there because the land was a lot more affordable, the soil was really rich and really easy to work with, there was good weather. They thought, well, there's not a lot of rain, but they thought we'll just go and there will be rain. Rookie mistake. A lot of them ended up packing up their lives and moving to the Great Plains to farm. The US government was very aware America was growing. The population was increasing at a very fast speed. So the US government started giving out incentives to the farmers who were moving from the East Coast to the Great Plains. Part of this incentive package meant that you could move to the Great Plains, and for a very small registration fee, you'd be given a farm and a house. And you could live there with your family. You had to prove that you were living there and you had to work the farm. That was the deal. But it was a great deal for the farmers. So a lot of people did it. That the migration to the Great Plains was just out of this world. Everybody was moving to the Great Plains. It's like, hey, Sally, are you and Ed moving to the Great Plains? Yeah, me too. They'll see you there. And once they got there, things were great. In fact, farming technology was coming a really long way. Now they had these devices that made plowing a lot easier. A lot of people think that the farmers actually got a little plow happy. They were plowing a little bit too much. Combine that with the fact there was this enormous drought. When that happens, the farmers would, I don't know what it's called, but they'll flip the soil when they're plowing. What's that called? Flip it? Toil? Till? I don't know. But they'd plow through the soil, churn it upside down. It took the dirt that was below the topsoil, which was more moist because it was underneath the top layer. They would turn it over, and that would help the ground and help the crops when there was a drought. It kind of kept things moist. I know people hate that word. I wonder if YouTube has banned the word moist, but it kept things moist. But they knew that if it didn't rain soon, there was going to be some trouble. And it did not rain soon. And then the stock market crashed, and then you had the Great Depression, and now it's 1930. There's been no rain, there's been no work, people's crops are dead, they have no money, and they're hungry. And when all of this is happening, you're in the Midwest, so you have these cold fronts that start coming through. Anyone who is from the Midwest knows that when a cold front starts coming through, the wind picks up. The wind started picking up. All of the soil, and you can imagine there were miles, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of soil that had been turned into farmland. All of the soil started to come up in the air. It was exactly like a desert, it was a desert dust storm, but instead of desert sand, it was dirt. People who survived the Dust Bowl said that they would wake up and look outside and the sky was just absolutely black because it was dirt. It wasn't dust, it was dirt. It was so fine. It was the consistency of dust, but it was black. Stores started selling cloth masks. Stores also started selling this glue people would paste onto their windows and onto their doors to seal up their houses. Survivors of the dust storm also said they would wake up and there would be 4 or 5 inches of dust on their kitchen table when they had sealed the house the night before. So the sealant isn't working. The dust is so small and so fine. It is making its way into people's log cabins, even though they have done everything in their power to prevent it from happening. And on top of that, you can't plant, you can't grow. There are no crops, there are no jobs. It's the Great Depression. So things were really, really bad for anybody who lived in the Great Plains. Now, in the late 1800s was also when the gold rush was happening. A lot of people moved to California during the gold rush. A lot of the folks who had moved to the Great Plains knew people in California. All of the people in the Great Plains decided to leave and try to go to California. They didn't want to go back east because they had all been from the East Coast. They knew how the land in the East Coast was rocky and there were trees and you just couldn't make a living farming on the East Coast. So they thought, let's go out west. That will be better. But it was an absolute mass exodus. The migration to California was so great. They had border patrolmen literally turning people away because there were too many people in California. The farmers, once they got to California, realized they were primarily growing food. That's not what these farmers were educated in. They just were not used to growing vegetables or food, so this was a little bit out of their area of expertise. They also realized that a lot of the farmland in California was corporate owned. It didn't have the same opportunity that the Great Plains had, where they could have their own land and their own acreage and their own house. So these people found themselves with no home, no career path in agriculture, doing something that they were educated in, growing something that they knew about. And they also didn't see a lot of opportunity to even obtain their own land because so much of it was corporate owned. So these migrant camps started to be set up all over California. The migrant camps would be filled with tents, sometimes boxcars from trains, cardboard boxes, whatever people could find to use for shelter, they would bring to the migrant camp. A lot of the farmers who were doing really well in the Great Plains and on the East Coast ended up taking jobs as cotton pickers or collecting berries. Little things like that were just so below what they were capable of, but they had to take these jobs in order to survive. Now, I needed to set the stage for what was going on in America during this time before telling you about Merle and his family, because his parents were very much so affected by the Dust Bowl. They were from Oklahoma. Merle's parents were named Jim and Flossie. By 1935, when Black Sunday hit the United States, they had 2 children, James, who was 13, and Lillian, who was 14. Flossie had also given birth to a baby girl that she named Flora. Unfortunately, I don't know if Flora was stillborn or if she just died the same day she was born, but unfortunately, Flora didn't make it. The saddest part in all of my research of this story was realizing Flora existed, and they had to leave her grave behind in Oklahoma when they fled the state during the Dust Bowl. It was in 1935 the Haggards left Oklahoma and started off for California. I don't think it was specifically because of Black Sunday. Black Sunday happened in April of 1935. In one of Flossie's diary entries, she says that they left Oklahoma in July. So I don't know if Black Sunday played a role or didn't play a role. It sounds like the reason they fled Oklahoma was because their barn burned. I don't know. It's kind of like when a restaurant burns down and you think, were they doing well? I don't know. Or if they couldn't live there anymore. It's just unlivable. To live in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, it was just unlivable. You're probably asking yourself, why did people stay for so many years? Well, when the dust storms started, a lot of people thought this was just a temporary thing and the dust storms were going to go away. Nobody thought that this was going to last for a decade. A lot of folks did stick it out from 1930 all the way to 1933, 1935. It kind of reminds me of COVID hitting the big cities like New York and Chicago and LA, and you're kind of sitting in the city like, is this temporary? Is this going to go away, or do I leave right now? Flossie also said in her diary that all they could manage to take with them was one small trailer that they hitched to the back of a 1926 Chevrolet. She said they left on a Monday and got to California by Friday. Flossie was 33 years old when they started the trip out west, and her husband Jim was 36 years old. James Jr. was 13 years old, and Lillian was 14 at the time of this trip. Merle had not been born yet. But they eventually got to Bakersfield, California. She wrote that their first jobs upon arriving were at a dairy farm milking cows, but that soon enough, Jim got a job with the Santa Fe Railway, which was a great job for Jim. While Jim was working in the railroad, Flossie was raising the children. Every Sunday, the family would go to church. There was a woman at the local church who was talking to Jim about how folks were starting to kind of renovate out these boxcars from trains into dwellings. I mean, remember, you have all these migrants living in tents. They're getting a little creative about how to find a home and how to make a home. And Jim looked at her and said, that's a really good idea. Jim Haggard had been talking about how he wanted to move his family out of Bakersfield into Oildale, but he needed to build a house, he needed to purchase land, he had to do this, this, and this. And this woman says to Jim, hey, look, these people are renovating out boxcars and they're living in them. Why don't you do that? At least for a few months until the house there is built. Once you've built your house, you can move out of the boxcar, but you're purchasing land up there. That would be the perfect solution for you and your family. And Jim was like, gosh darn, you're right. That's a great idea. So he and the family move up to Oildale, California. He didn't have any land that he had purchased yet, but this woman from church did have a plot of land, and she let Jim rent out that land to her. It was on that land that Jim started to renovate out a boxcar to make it a little home dwelling for his wife and his 2 kids. Now, again, this was just going to be temporary until he built them a proper home, but that takes time. And just a few months into moving into the boxcar, I don't know if just the manifest destiny got to them or what, but seems like accidentally, Flossie announced to Jim and her 2 children in 1937 that she was pregnant with Merle. And this was a surprise. Lillian remembers her mother announcing that she was pregnant and says that her mother was, quote, blushingly telling them she was pregnant. So, a few months later, Merle Haggard was born into this boxcar family. Did anyone read the Boxcar Children growing up? Just a side note. I was obsessed with the Boxcar Children. Once Jim found out that Flossie was pregnant with another child, he quickly began building out the boxcar. So now it wasn't just one boxcar that had a little living space and some beds. He started making a bathroom and he built out another bedroom. He actually built out this boxcar to be a really cute small house. There's a video on YouTube of a guy who goes to see this house and he takes you on a full tour of the house. I will link that in the description below. You will be very surprised to see that this is like an actual little hut. It's like an actual little dwelling. It's super, super cute. And then in April of 1937, of course, on April 6th, Merle Haggard was born. There was an interview with Lillian Haggard where she remembers growing up with Merle. She says that she thought Merle was a lot of fun. She thought he was really funny, very mischievous, and joked around that she used to shove him out of the house with a broom. Like she was just sweeping him out of the house. And for about 9 years, the little boxcar house was filled with joy and happiness, and the family was super close. But then, when Merle was only 9 years old, his father suddenly died of a brain hemorrhage. This absolutely destroyed Merle. He was very close with his father. His 2 siblings were also quite a few years older than he was, so he wasn't really connected with them in a way that he would have been connected with a sibling that was closer to his own age. But his dad was really his best friend, and losing him really spun him out of control. When Merle was 12 years old, his older brother realized that Merle was having a hard time and gifted him his own guitar, which he had worked very hard to get and to play. And he said to Merle, I want you to have this. He gave it to Merle hoping that Merle would make music his hobby. He could tell that Merle was very mischievous. Merle wasn't paying attention in class. He was kind of getting in trouble for little things like talking or not paying attention or looking out the window. Merle loved this guitar. He started playing it and absolutely loved it. He fell in love with music. He always talked about his idols from the moment he began playing music up until his death. He said that a lot of times at shows, if he didn't know what to play, he would just start playing something from one of his, quote, heroes. He had a lot of respect for the men who came before him. This kind of reminds me of Jelly Roll as well, because Jelly Roll's mother also gave him a guitar, hoping that guitar and music would be his hobby, and it just wasn't. Jelly Roll ended up turning to a life of crime, and ultimately this is what Merle did too. When Merle was just 13 years old, he already had a fake ID. He would hop freight trains just to go from town to town illegally. Around this time, Flossie was about 44 years old. She took up a job as a bookkeeper, trying to support the family following her husband's death. His older siblings were also working jobs, so Merle spent a lot of days alone while the family was out of the house. And this allowed Merle to get into quite a bit of trouble while they were away. Not only was Merle getting into trouble while his family was out working, but he was also teaching himself guitar and learning all of the songs to legends such as Hank Williams, Bob Wills, and Lefty Frizzle. By the time Merle was 14 years old, though, he started trying to deposit fake checks and started forging signatures. His mother was getting really fed up with his attitude and his mischief. One day, his mother literally called the police on Merle and said, "This boy is trouble. He needs to go to a juvenile detention center and get set straight." So his mother actually sent him to his very first juvenile detention center by calling the police on her own son. This obviously did not go over well for Merle. He was very upset that his mother was sending him to a juvenile detention center, and she was so strict and she was so mean. But several years later, this would inspire his song Mama Tried, which he later said was his favorite song. And in his older years, he made a point to make it very obvious to his audience and his fans that his mother really tried to set him straight. His mother had no idea where this mischief was coming from. The whole family was pretty calm and tame compared to Merle. It almost makes me wonder if Merle was really the son of his father, you know what I mean? Because his personality just seemed to be so different from the rest of the family. But don't let me plant any rumors here on YouTube. I'm literally just speculating that it's just so strange how his personality was so different. But who knows? Who knows? She really tried. She did. She sent him to the detention center. I don't know for how long, but I know once he got out, he had even more of a desire to be a criminal than he had when he got in there. So I think it had the opposite effect. Maybe he met some other rowdy kids in the juvenile detention center and just like really loved their vibe. I actually couldn't help but laugh in one of Merle's interviews. He's talking about why he kept hopping on freight trains and running away. And he said, quote, "I don't know. My dad was dead and my mom was old." And I'm like, doing the math, she was 44, like 45 years old. Merle, that is not old. Either way, Merle got to the point that he just did not want to live there anymore. One day, he did run away from home for good. He got on a freight train and took it all the way down to Texas. He was already wanted for robbery. He had robbed several times up in California. By this age, he's like 15 or 16 years old. He was already very much a criminal and very much wanted by the police. And he had actually been to the juvenile detention center a few times after being sent there when he was just 13 or 14. He had been there quite a few times by the time he was 16, about 16 years old. So this was the norm, that Merle would get out, rob someone, do something bad, and get sent back to juvenile detention. He escaped from juvenile detention a couple of times as well, but on this particular time, he took a freight train down to Texas with a friend. And once he got to Texas, he got arrested because they thought that he was the same person who had robbed a place in Texas, even though that wasn't Merle. It was someone else, but it might as well have been Merle because he was robbing so many things at that point. And anyway, they sent him back to California, where he went to another juvenile detention center, and this just kept happening for a few years. When Merle was 19 years old, though, he met a girl from Bakersfield, California. Her name was Leona Hobbs, and she was a beautiful little teenage girl. Merle and Leona instantly hit it off and were married in the same year that they started dating. Leona was a waitress when she met Merle, and I can't really figure out Leona because she seems like a good girl and someone who was really trying to do well, but what did you see in Merle, Leona? I don't get that. I mean, Merle was playing music at the time. The year was 1956. You know, maybe she was more of like a cocktail waitress than like a diner waitress. I'm not sure. She must have been really infatuated with him because he was so gross. He was like a felon who had been in juvenile detention so many times. I don't know. I guess that was attractive to Leona. She's like, yes. The couple was married just a few months later in 1957, and shortly after that, Merle got sent to prison again for robbery. This time, he was tried as an adult and was sentenced to 3 years at San Quentin prison. Merle said that he had a great time at San Quentin. He said he It was a fun time in one of his interviews. He had a lot of jobs. He worked at the laundromat, for example, and he said that the man who ran the laundromat wasn't very attentive. So quite often, he and the other person who worked at the laundromat would sneak out during their shift to play guitar. Merle had actually gotten Leona pregnant before he went to San Quentin prison, and Leona gave birth to their first daughter, Dana, on April 1st of 1957. Merle missed the birth because he was in jail. Then on January 1st, New Year's Day of 1958, just 1 year into Merle's sentence at San Quentin prison, Johnny Cash came to sing. Now, Merle makes sure to let you know that country music was not super popular back in 1958. I mean, it was popular, but it wasn't like extremely popular as it is today. He said it wasn't exactly cool that Johnny Cash was coming. In fact, this was Johnny Cash's first prison performance ever. Merle also had no idea that he was witnessing history happen before his eyes. He said that, they just said that this guy Johnny Cash is coming to play, and people were like, okay. Johnny Cash had lost his voice, and he wasn't able to immediately start playing. So the crowd of prisoners are kind of sitting there thinking, oh yeah, great show. So glad you came. You can't even sing. But Johnny got up, and he gets into the microphone, and he looks at one of the prison guards and says, could I get a glass of water? And the prison guard was chewing gum, kind of smacking his gum. And Johnny just straight up made fun of the prison guard. I don't know if he called him a camel or whatever he said, but he made fun of the prison guard in one way or another for chewing his gum, the way he chewed his gum. The entire crowd of prisoners just erupted laughing. They thought it was the funniest thing because no prisoner could make fun of a prison guard like that, but Johnny Cash could. And from that moment forward, Merle Haggard said that Johnny Cash had won over all of the prisoners in the prison. Johnny continued to play his set, and the prisoners absolutely loved it, which made Merle the most popular prisoner after Johnny Cash left, because Merle knew how to play the guitar. And after that concert, all of the prisoners wanted to learn how to, quote, play like Johnny. Now, 6 months after Johnny Cash played at San Quentin prison, Merle would have been about 1.5 years into his sentence, he found out that Leona had given birth to another child. This information was hard to find. It wasn't until I was listening to one interview where Merle said, I found out that Leona was pregnant with another man's child, and I just lost it. And I said, what? Say what, Merle? Indeed, Merle had an illegitimate son. Leona had her son with someone else. I don't know who the father was, but I know it was not Merle. When Merle found out that Leona was pregnant with another man's child, he did go a little berserk. One of his jobs in the San Quentin prison was brewing beer. This was allowed. He would brew the beer, and he would sell it and distribute it in the prison. I don't know how that worked. I don't know how that was legal, but it was, I guess. But either way, he started drinking the beer, and he got in trouble for being a, quote, drunkard. And after that, he got sent to solitary confinement in San Quentin prison. While in solitary confinement, Merle met 2 men, one whose name was Rabbit, and the other, who was pretty famous, his name was Caryl Chessman. I think Merle gets Rabbit and Caryl confused quite often in his interviews, especially in the later interviews later in his life. But I found the actual court records and the dates, and Caryl Chessman really was the reason that Merle turned his life around. Rabbit had tried to at one point convince Merle to escape prison with him. Merle had escaped from prison multiple times before. I think it was 17 times Merle had escaped a prison or a juvenile detention center. So Rabbit came to Merle and was saying, Merle, we gotta escape prison together. It would be so good. It was either Merle who said no or Rabbit who said no, or maybe they both just decided it wasn't a good idea to do it together. Either way, Rabbit decided he would escape the prison. He did escape and ended up shooting a highway patrolman and killing him during the escape. He was sent back to San Quentin prison and was executed. That's all fine and dandy. Merle knew he shouldn't have escaped the prison with Rabbit. He could have. In fact, he had escaped 17 times before that. After that incident, Merle did start thinking, that could have been me. It did kind of shake him, but not to the point that he was ready to change his life. It wasn't until Merle had fully witnessed the story of Caryl Chessman that he got really shook. Caryl had never actually killed anybody, but Caryl had done a lot of other things that were really not good. Caryl was notorious for pretending to be a police officer and pulling over people, usually couples, and then doing very bad things to those couples and then letting them go. So he had never actually committed murder, but he did very, 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 very bad things. And one thing that he did that was especially bad was he pulled over a single woman. She wasn't with another man like his other victims. Pulls her over. He dragged her from her car into his car, did a lot of really bad things, robbed her, and then let her go. That woman went to the police and identified Caryl right away. In fact, everyone who Caryl had mugged and done very bad things to had described and identified Caryl right away. So the authorities find Caryl pretty quickly and bring him into prison. Caryl didn't understand. A law had just been passed in California. If you had even just dragged a woman from her car to your car, even if it was just 20 feet like that, if you did it by force and did it against her will, then it classified as kidnapping. So now Caryl was facing execution. He was facing the death penalty for kidnapping amongst many, 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 many other crimes. Caryl kept fighting this execution. He acted as his own lawyer. In all of Caryl's free time, he would go to the library and study law so that he could be his own lawyer and fight this execution. He actually managed to reverse the execution decision 6 times in court, but the execution just kept coming back to him, and he kept trying to fight it in a different way. This went on for years. And of course, everyone in the prison knew Caryl's story, and they knew that Caryl was fighting this execution, trying to be his own lawyer, and everyone was rooting for Caryl. They all thought, Caryl, you're innocent. Caryl, you don't deserve the death penalty. And maybe he didn't. He didn't actually kill anybody else. That's a whole other discussion, but the whole prison and the prisoners were just rooting for Caryl to not be executed and to win these court cases. Caryl, in his free time, also wrote 3 or 4 best-selling books. I'll link them in the description below. One of them was called Prison Cell 244, I think. Prison Cell 244 on death row. It's actually quite an interesting read. I promise I will link all of them in the description, but that one especially sounded like it was the best seller, even though all of them were bestsellers. So Caryl was really a celebrity. I mean, the entire United States knew Caryl, knew Caryl's story, and knew that he was facing the death penalty for these types of crimes. Well, one day, Merle Haggard is in the prison yard when someone comes up to him and says, "Did you hear about Caryl?" And Merle says no. Merle, while in solitary confinement after finding out about Leona's pregnancy, had been communicating with Caryl on a daily basis through the air conditioning vents in the prison. Merle said he felt as though he had been communicating with a celebrity. He felt like it was really cool talking to Caryl. Caryl was his friend. Caryl was someone he looked up to. Everyone loved Caryl. So now Merle is on the prison yard one day. He had just talked to Caryl like nothing was going on. His prison friend tells him that Caryl has been executed in the gas chamber. Merle said he didn't believe this friend. He said, "No, I was just talking to Caryl. Caryl's fine." And the guy said, "No, they just did it. While you were standing here in this prison yard, they executed him in the gas chamber." Merle went back to his cell and tried to communicate with Caryl, and Caryl was not there. And this really shook Merle. This was the moment for Merle that he decided he had to turn his life around. From that moment forward, Merle started taking all of the jobs in the prison that he currently had seriously, not just like the laundromat job where he would sneak out. He actually started working, and he also started taking up other jobs in the prison, jobs that other prisoners didn't want, the undesirable jobs like cleaning toilets. I don't know that he cleaned toilets. That's just an example of an undesirable job. It just said he said he just took up all the jobs people didn't want. So I'm assuming maybe cleaning toilets was one of them. His plan was that he would get enough points to get parole, get released, and then turn his life around. He said he wanted to be someone who was, quote, respected. And 6 months after Caryl's execution, Merle was released on good behavior. Merle went back to Leona. They had some talking to do. Like the child, Marty. His name was Marty. I didn't mention that. Marty Haggard. Merle decided that he would stay married to Leona and that he would raise Marty as one of his own. And for years, actually, it was not discussed that Marty was illegitimate at all. I think it is a little well known that Marty was illegitimate. I'd be curious if you're watching this, if you knew that Marty was an illegitimate baby or not, because I didn't, and this was crazy to me. But either way, Merle and Leona continue their marriage, and Merle starts really focusing on his music career. He is serious. He is not a felon anymore. He's a musician, and he's trying to prove it. Now, this is very similar, I think, to Johnny Cash's marriage to Vivian in a lot of ways. If you haven't seen my video about Johnny and June Cash and their love story, I talk about Johnny and Vivian and their marriage first before Johnny had married June. And it seems a little similar. It seems like Merle was really focusing on his music and just not focusing on his family and on his family life, which obviously takes a toll. You gotta focus on your family, dude. Any husband knows that. Any good husband knows that. Now, during these years with Leona, not only was Merle really focusing on his music, but he was also drinking quite a bit and going out a lot. Things that you don't want a husband to do. There were a lot of nights that Merle would come home really, really late, really tipsy, really drunk, and he was just kind of ignoring Leona in a lot of ways. In fact, during these years, Merle started playing guitar at a local restaurant. It was at that restaurant where a woman was a cocktail waitress, and that woman's name was Bonnie Owens. Bonnie was 8 years older than Merle. After Merle's shows at this local restaurant, Bonnie would continue serving Merle his liquor, which he loved, and talking with him and flirting with him. And in these moments, Merle tells her how he's really trying to make it as a musician. Now, Bonnie Owens had just recently divorced Buck Owens. So she had a lot of connections in the music industry, and she says to Merle, hey, I'll start calling up some of my connections and trying to get you gigs in other towns. And Merle was like, that's great. So he starts spending even more time with Bonnie because he really believes that Bonnie can help him. Well, Leona starts becoming increasingly frustrated with the late nights. She's starting to get a little bit jealous of why he's staying after these shows and who he is seeing. And then Merle started telling Leona that she was being absolutely ridiculous and dramatic and that it was nothing, but he was spending all this time with Bonnie. Okay, you get it. We get it. Now, in 1963, Leona and Merle welcomed a third child into the world. Well, technically second. That child's name was Noel. And it was in December of 1963 that Merle got signed to a small record label called Tally. Tally would release his song, Sing a Sad Song, which actually gained national attention. And this was the first time that Merle had gained national attention. It was also during this time that Bonnie and her connections were starting to come through. So Merle was now traveling all around from city to city and town to town, playing Sing a Sad Song with Bonnie. Soon, the flirting with Bonnie and the friendship with Bonnie turned into more, and Merle started falling in love with Bonnie. He says it was impossible not to fall in love with Bonnie. She was always there for him. He said that she had a maturity that Leona did not have. That maturity, by the way, probably came from the fact that Bonnie really didn't care about Merle at all. But he says that he respects Leona, and Leona's a great woman, and Leona gave him his first litter of kids. Yeah, he referred to his kids with Leona as his, quote, first litter. Okay. Merle tells Leona, a year after she gave birth to Noel, he doesn't love her anymore, he loves Bonnie. He filed for divorce from Leona Hobbs, and not even a year later, married Bonnie Owens. Now, Bonnie, I don't know what's wrong with this girl. Bonnie, it seems to me, just didn't care. She had already been married to Buck Owens. She already had 2 boys, 2 children of her own. And she always said she saw Merle as a younger brother, even after they were married. She always said, he's my younger brother, he's my younger brother. Like, that's just weird. Is that not weird? Okay, I cannot keep my opinions to myself. It's weird. I think that Bonnie was just lonely and wanted companionship. I don't think she loved Merle. There, I said it. That's how I feel. Okay. So in 1964, Merle and Bonnie get married. Bonnie is 35 years old and Merle is 27. Merle actually says his hit songs never would have become hits if it weren't for Bonnie, and I believe that. Bonnie was very strategic. She was well connected, she knew the music industry. I think that in a lot of ways, she really wanted Merle to succeed, but she was the strategy behind his success. Every time he even had the urge to write, Bonnie would be there with a piece of paper and a pencil, ready to scribble down whatever he came up with. Any songwriter knows once you get an idea or once you get a lyric or once you get a phrase in your head, you need to get it out and on paper or in a voice memo or something as soon as possible. Bonnie was Merle Haggard's voice memo. I'll put it that way. And Merle gives her a lot of credit for the songs like Mama Tried, because she was there writing the lyrics as soon as they came to him. Bonnie was also the inspiration for his song, Today I Started Loving You Again. Merle and Bonnie had been traveling. They had been going back and forth from town to town to town. One day, they're sitting in the airport. He said we were starting to feel disconnected. We hadn't seen each other for a while. And we're sitting there at the gate waiting for the plane. He says, we talked for like 20 minutes, and I realized that was the first time we had really spoken in a few weeks. And he looked at her and he said, you know, today I started loving you again. And she looked back at him and said, hey, that's a great idea for a song. Bonnie, I feel like, just did not care. Girl didn't care. You know, he's sitting there going, I started loving you. And she's like, that's a good song. Let me get a piece of paper. So she starts writing down lyrics that he's coming up with to Today I Started Loving You Again. At one point, she got up, went and got a hamburger, came back, and he had finished writing the whole song. Merle actually ended up giving half of the royalties of that song to Bonnie because it was inspired by her and she was such a big part of it, he thought. And then when they got divorced, Bonnie ended up getting more of that money, more of those royalties. So I think when it comes down to it, Merle only was getting like 12% of the royalties from that song, which I think is kind of funny. But that was their relationship. And like I said, Bonnie had 2 sons before marrying Merle, but Merle and Bonnie did not have any children together. However, we later found out in 2004, Merle had an illegitimate son with another woman while he was married to Bonnie. So I guess it's good that Bonnie didn't care that much about Merle because Merle was all over the place with other people even while he was married to Bonnie. So much so that he actually got another woman pregnant and she had his child. Scott Haggard went to a concert in 2004 and saw Merle play. After the show, Scott went to Merle and told him who he was. Obviously, he told security and everyone like who he was. He ended up getting a DNA test and proving that he was his son. I don't know how this all unfolded, to be honest with you, but that's how it unfolded. And his birth date was December 1968. Scott's mother is a woman named Leona, and Leona worked at the jail, a local jail in Alabama. Okay. Now, in the early 1970s, Merle also heard a woman playing on the radio named Leona Williams. And right away, after hearing Leona Williams on the radio, Merle developed an infatuation with Leona Williams. He's just all over. He thinks everyone, by the way, is his true love. I can't. So he hears this woman, Leona, on the radio, absolutely loves her. He doesn't actually meet her until 1975. When Merle met Leona Williams in person, he immediately asked her to join his tour. Now, Bonnie was on the tour with Merle. Bonnie was Merle's lead vocalist. But Bonnie was getting tired of the traveling. She kind of wanted to take a break. So in 1975, when Merle met Leona Williams, it was the perfect opportunity to tell Bonnie, hey, you should take a break. Take a back seat, baby. I've got someone who will fill your shoes. Her name's Leona Williams. And I do feel like he probably did convince Bonnie to take a break. He was probably like, you seem tired. You should take a break. And then, ooh, fresh blood, Leona Williams comes on tour. Well, Merle and Leona Williams start having an affair as well. He won't say it, but I mean, he did. Come on, we're not stupid. Leona Williams, by the way, was 6 or 7 years younger than Merle. So the complete opposite of Bonnie, who was 7 or 8 years older than Merle. Now he's going like 7 years the other way. Eventually, Bonnie caught on that this affair was happening. She said that she didn't even care. She said she wasn't even upset. Bonnie, I told you, Bonnie just did not care about him. I said that from the beginning. I literally thought that as soon as I started reading about Bonnie and Merle and listening to their interviews, I thought this woman doesn't care about him at all, you know? And then later, she says in an interview when she found out that Merle and Leona Williams were having an affair and Merle came to her and said, I want a divorce, she said, I wasn't even upset. I wasn't bitter about it at all. I always knew that that was going to happen. Sometimes I hear other people speak and I don't understand. Anyways. Oh, I missed a part. In 1972, by the way, Ronald Reagan actually pardoned Merle Haggard. I wanted to add this. Ronald Reagan gave Merle a lifetime pardon for all of his crimes that he had committed. Now, this was a big deal because Jelly Roll actually speaks about this in one of his interviews about how hard it is to do normal things that you wouldn't even think about as an ex-felon. There are places you cannot work because you are an ex-felon. There are places you cannot buy a house. There are clubs that you cannot join. You have lots of restrictions if you're an ex-felon. So having a pardon means that you don't have to put that on your paperwork anymore. It's much easier to find work. It's it's much easier to be a part of society when you are not a convicted felon. So Ronald Reagan giving Merle Haggard that pardon was a really big deal. But during this time, Merle is falling in love with another woman who's not his wife. So I don't know. But his career is also taking off. So, I mean, I don't know. So Bonnie and Merle ultimately divorce, and Merle turns right around and marries Leona Williams. And let me tell you, Bonnie Owens was the maid of honor at their wedding. I know. What? Just like, Bonnie. Bonnie. You deserve so much more in life, Bonnie. Bonnie. Ugh. Now, Leona and Merle's marriage would not be an easy one. In fact, there was a lot of friction in their marriage. I think that Leona Williams could tell that Merle didn't love her. Merle didn't love anybody. I don't think that Merle is capable of love. And actually, I was listening to an interview he was giving where I think it was with Dan Rathers. I'll link it down below, the full interview. And he says to him that he doesn't want to retire. And Dan says, why don't you want to retire, Merle? You're in your 70s. Go on and retire. And Merle says, no, well, I'm worried of the loneliness. I'm worried that there would be loneliness. And then he says, well, wait a minute. I mean, look at all the kids that you have and all the grandkids. How could you say that you would be lonely if you retired from music? And Merle said that if his grandchildren told him that they loved him, he wasn't sure that they'd be genuine about it, that they genuinely would love him. I don't think that Merle is capable of love. Okay? I said it. I don't know. Ask his ex-wives what they think. Either way, Leona and Merle did have a really rough go. They continued to tour in different tour buses even after they were married. The relationship with Merle did inspire quite a few songs that Leona wrote that were very popular, including but not limited to, quote, You Take Me for Granted, and, quote, Someday when things are good, I'm gonna leave. Tell us how you really feel, Leona. But these songs did really, really well. They actually charted very high. I don't have the exact chart number in my brain, but they charted very high and they did very well. So Merle did have some sort of purpose in Leona's life. Now, Leona Williams and Merle also did not have any children together. 5 years into Merle's marriage with Leona Williams, he filed for divorce from her as well. Oop, I'm done with you. Bye-bye. Merle had actually already started falling for another woman named Deborah. Deborah was 32 and Merle was 48 when they would be married in 1985. Deborah was a backup singer. I don't think that Deborah ever married again after Merle. It said that this was her first marriage, that she hadn't been married before. All I know about their marriage is that 2 years into it, they separated. Nothing else about that except Merle was messing around and was with other women. So Deborah was probably just thinking, I guess I'll just stay married to this guy, but be separated from him so he's not in my life. Deborah, I don't know. Maybe Deborah just had no idea what she was getting herself into. While Debbie and Merle were separated, in 1987-1988 timeframe, Merle meets another woman named Theresa Lane. Now, Theresa was 22 years younger than Merle. He just keeps... The older Merle gets, the younger his wives get. Now, on December 23rd, 1989, Theresa gave birth to a baby girl named Janessa. And it would later be revealed that Janessa was Merle's daughter. So Merle was definitely cheating on Debbie as well with Theresa. Nothing new here to see. Just a few months after Janessa Haggard was born to Theresa and Merle, Merle filed for divorce from Debbie, citing irreconcilable differences. Oh, really? He didn't even try to reconcile things. Debbie was 38 years old when Merle filed for divorce against her. And she kind of just disappeared. I couldn't find anything else on her. If you can find anything else on Debbie, please tell me. I'd love to read it. In 1991, Merle and Debbie's divorce was finalized, and not even a year later, Theresa gave birth to another child named Ben, also Merle's child. After Theresa had now given birth to 2 of his children, Merle decided to marry Theresa. In 1993, Theresa was 34 and Merle was 56 when they were wed. And this would be Merle's longest marriage. I don't know if it was just because he was older and was tired of marrying and divorcing so many times. Really not sure what's going on. Or maybe it was true love. Could have been true love. Either way, Merle and Theresa were married for 23 years, which is even longer than his marriage to Bonnie, which was 13 years. It just seems to me like the women who cared about Merle and actually loved Merle, like the Leonas, Merle couldn't stand them. He didn't want to be loved by them. It was kind of like he needed a woman like Bonnie or Theresa who was somewhat removed from the whole love aspect of a relationship. His relationships with Bonnie and Theresa, for me as an onlooker, seemed very clinical. Okay, so that's all I'm gonna say about that. Merle was married to Theresa when he passed away in 2016. In 2017, Nashville had a tribute concert dedicated to Merle and his music, and I have to say, I'm a big fan of Merle's music. You know, it takes people like Merle to be in this world. It's like that Miranda Lambert song, All Kinds of Kinds. It just takes different kinds of kinds, and we needed Merle, and we needed his music, and we needed this rough life that he led to bring us that music. And you know, his mother is sitting there thinking, where is this mischief coming from? You know, where is this personality coming from? This is not our family. This is not how we operate. This is not our vibe. You know, what is this? What is happening? And truly, I believe that God put Merle Haggard on this earth, gave him that personality to go out there and raise hell and come on back and then write a song about it. I really think that explains it. We needed this. He also has a very special place in his heart for the song Sing Me Back Home. Sing Me Back Home was written based off of his encounters with Rabbit and Caryl Chessman and them being executed in the gas chamber. So it's a lovely song, but just picture being executed in a gas chamber while you listen to it. And it kind of changes the meaning a little bit. It's a lot like reading a fiction book and having all the characters in your mind, and then you go to watch the movie and you think, that character is not how I had pictured the character in my head. And that's how Sing Me Back Home is. You listen to the song Sing Me Back Home, and you have this whole, you know, idea of how it relates to you in your life, and you're thinking of something. And then you hear about the story behind about Caryl Chessman being executed in a gas chamber. It's so different from what I was thinking, but it works. His songs will continue to be sung for generations to come. Merle had a very special place in his heart for his, quote, heroes. He was always talking about his heroes, always playing his heroes at his shows. And I really think that country music and the people in country music have done a really good job of honoring heroes like Merle and singing songs of Merle Haggard's and keeping those songs alive. One of my favorite Merle Haggard songs is Rainbow Stew. Now, Merle is notorious for being a red, white, and blue, go get 'em American. Downright American, you know? But when he wrote the song Rainbow Stew, there was a lot of confusion and people, not confusion, I guess, but ambiguity. And people started kind of bickering with each other if Merle was singing from a leftist point of view or a conservative right-winged point of view. And it's kind of funny because you can look at it both ways. If you haven't heard the song Rainbow Stew, Mama Tried, Sing Me Back Home, or any of Merle's songs, I'm going to link his Spotify in the description below. You can go ahead and follow him there and listen to all of his songs. I will also link his YouTube, his website, and the Instagram accounts of his children and or grandchildren who are still living, because most of his kids did go into the music industry in one way or another. It's pretty fascinating to see. And if you enjoy this type of content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up button. It really helps out the channel just to have one extra subscriber or one extra thumbs up. And if podcasting is more your thing, you can now follow Roots Music History on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to get a mug from the Roots merch store. If you go onto the YouTube channel, there's a little tab that says store. It's also, you should see it in every video that I post, on the side or on the bottom. It'll say Roots Music Store. You can get a mug or a shirt or a hat or a bag, literally anything. And of course, I will see you on the next Roots Rockumentary.
Hungry for the road all my life, thirsty for adventure all my youth, chasing all my freedoms down Liberty Avenue.